The silence aboard the Krillian battleship Eternal Dominion was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional click of cooling metal. Admiral Vextera stood before the massive viewport, her four arms clasped behind her back as she gazed out at the debris field that had once been humanity's last stronghold. The planet Earth hung in the distance, a scarred and broken world wreathed in the smoke of 1,000 fires. "The final human settlement has been eliminated, Admiral," reported Commander Zixtal from his position at the tactical console. His reptilian features bore the satisfied expression of a predator who had just finished a particularly challenging hunt. "Our ground forces confirm complete elimination of all resistance. The human species is now extinct." Vexteron nodded slowly, though something gnawed at the edge of her consciousness. In her 300 years of military service, she had overseen the extinction of 17 different species. Each had been different, presenting unique challenges and requiring specific tactics. But the humans had been something else entirely. "Display the final battle statistics," she commanded, turning away from the viewport. The holographic display materialized in the center of the command deck, showing the devastating numbers. 4 billion Krillians deployed across 12 star systems. 200,000 warships of various classes. Weapons capable of cracking planets, and shields that could withstand stellar flares. Against this overwhelming force, humanity had fielded perhaps 50 million soldiers, a few thousand outdated vessels, and technology that was centuries behind Krillian standards. It should have been a slaughter lasting mere days. Instead, the war had dragged on for nearly 2 decades. "Remind me," Vextera said, her voice carrying a note of unease that she didn't bother to hide, "how many Krillian lives were lost in this campaign?" Zixtal's confident expression faltered slightly. 700 million combat casualties, Admiral. Another 200 million support personnel. He paused, as if the numbers themselves were difficult to believe. Approximately 40% of our entire military force. The bridge fell silent. Even the junior officers stopped their work to stare at the display. No species in recorded galactic history had ever inflicted such losses on the Krillian Empire. Most surrendered after the first demonstration of superior firepower. Those that chose to fight rarely lasted more than a few months before their resistance crumbled. "Ow," whispered Lieutenant Karmoth from the communication station. "How did such a primitive species manage to?" "Because they never stopped fighting," Vextera interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned respect. "Every system we conquered, they made us pay for in blood. Every planet we invaded became a fortress. Every city became a killing ground. They turned their own worlds into weapons." She remembered the siege of Mars, where human defenders had rigged the entire terraforming network to explode in a chain reaction that had consumed 3 full Krillian fleets. The battle for the Jupiter orbital platforms, where human engineers had somehow managed to turn the gas giant's own gravitational field into a weapon that had pulled dozens of Krillian ships into the crushing atmosphere below. "They fought like demons," she continued, lost in the memories. "When we destroyed their fleets, they built new ones from the wreckage. When we conquered their colonies, they turned every civilian into a soldier. Children as young as 12 were found carrying explosive devices. Elderly humans who could barely walk would detonate hidden charges as our troops passed. Commander Sixtal shifted uncomfortably. "The war is over, Admiral. They are extinct. What relevance do their past tactics have now?" Vextera turned to study her second-in-command. Zixtal was young for his rank, having earned his position through political connections rather than battlefield experience. He had joined the human campaign only in its final year, missing the grinding horror of the earlier phases. "Have you ever heard of the Battle of the Titan Nebula?" she asked. The younger officer shook his head. 15 years ago, we cornered a human fleet of 30 vessels in that nebula. We brought 200 ships to ensure their destruction. The humans knew they were outgunned and outnumbered. Their commander, a female named Sarah Chun, opened a communication channel. Vextera's expression grew distant. She said something that has haunted me ever since. She said that humans had a saying, "Death is not the opposite of life, but a part of it." "What happened?" asked Lieutenant Karmoth, despite himself. "They detonated their own reactor cores simultaneously, creating a chain reaction that destabilized the nebula's gas clouds. The resulting explosion consumed both fleets. We lost 160 ships. The humans lost 30. But They took 8 of our vessels with them for every one of theirs that died. The bridge crew exchanged uncomfortable glances. Such tactics were beyond the understanding of most civilized species. The Krillians valued individual life and fought to preserve their own forces. The concept of deliberately sacrificing everything to inflict maximum damage on an enemy was alien to them. "Admiral," the sensor officer called from his station, "we're receiving priority communications from High Command." On screen, Vextra ordered. The holographic display shifted to show the imposing form of Supreme Admiral Kothran, Supreme Commander of all Krillian forces. His ancient features bore the scars of a dozen campaigns, and his 6 eyes glowed with the satisfaction of victory. "Admiral Vextra," his voice boomed across the bridge. "Congratulations on completing the human extinction campaign. The Emperor is pleased with your performance, despite the excessive casualties." "Thank you, Supreme Admiral. We are preparing to begin occupation and resource extraction operations." Negative. Kothran's response was immediate and firm. "New orders have arrived from the Imperial Council. All forces are to withdraw from former human space immediately. The entire Sol system and surrounding territories are to be declared a dead zone. No Krillian vessel is to enter these coordinates again." Vextra felt a chill run down her spine. "Sir, with respect, those systems contain vast mineral wealth and strategic positions. Why would the Empire abandon such valuable territory?" The Supreme Admiral's expression grew grim. "Because the Council fears what we might have awakened. Human resistance was unlike anything we have ever encountered. Their willingness to die, their refusal to accept defeat, their ability to turn any situation into a weapon. These traits concern the Emperor's advisors. But they are extinct, Supreme Admiral. Confirmed dead." "Are they?" Kothran leaned forward, his ancient features creasing with worry. "In all our campaigns across the galaxy, we have learned that some species possess capabilities that transcend the physical realm. The humans showed an almost supernatural ability to continue fighting beyond the point where any rational species would surrender. What if death is not the end for them? What if their hatred and desire for revenge can somehow persist?" Vextra wanted to dismiss such concerns as superstition, but she couldn't shake her own unease. Throughout the campaign, there had been incidents that defied explanation. Krillian troops reported feeling watched in areas where no humans could possibly be present. Equipment failures that seemed almost intentionally designed to cause maximum inconvenience. Strange energy readings in abandoned human facilities that their scientists couldn't identify or explain. "There have been reports," she admitted reluctantly. "Unexplained phenomena in areas we've secured. Our troops are unsettled." "Then, you understand the Council's concerns. Withdraw all forces immediately. Deploy automated warning beacons around the perimeter of human space. Any vessel that enters those coordinates without authorization is to be fired upon without warning." The communication ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. After 20 years of brutal warfare, they were simply going to abandon everything they had fought for? The mineral wealth of the asteroid belts, the strategic value of Earth's position, the technological secrets hidden in human laboratories, all of it left behind because of superstitious fears? "You heard the Supreme Admiral," Vextra said finally. "Begin withdrawal procedures. All ships are to clear human space within 72 hours. As the crew rushed to carry out her orders, Vextra remained standing before the viewport, staring at the dead world of Earth. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she could hear the echo of Sarah Chen's words. Death is not the opposite of life, but a part of it. The withdrawal proceeded smoothly over the next 3 days. Fleet after fleet of Krillian vessels powered up their faster-than-light drives and disappeared into the void, carrying with them the bitter knowledge that their victory had come at an almost unacceptable cost. The automated mining stations were shut down and abandoned. Research facilities were sealed and left to decay. Even the memorial markers erected to honor fallen Krillian soldiers were left behind. By the time the last transport vessel cleared the boundary of human space, the Sol system was truly dead. No lights shone from the surfaces of the rocky planets. No signals transmitted from the orbital stations. The space lanes that had once carried the commerce of an entire species now held only debris and emptiness. But death, as the humans had claimed, was not the opposite of life. 3 weeks after the Krillian withdrawal, Sensors on the automated warning beacons began detecting anomalous energy signatures throughout the abandoned systems. The readings were faint and inconsistent, appearing and disappearing without any discernible pattern. When the data was transmitted back to Krillian High Command, military scientists dismissed them as equipment malfunctions caused by residual radiation from the final battles. They were wrong. On the asteroid mining station designated Facility 7 Alpha, deep in the outer reaches of the Sol system, something stirred in the darkness. The facility had been one of humanity's most advanced research installations, where scientists had been conducting experimental work on consciousness transfer and quantum field manipulation. The Krillians had invaded it early in the war, killed everyone inside, and then used it as a forward supply depot. Now, in the absolute silence of the abandoned station, lights began to flicker in empty corridors. Computer terminals that had been shut down for months suddenly blazed alive. In the Central Research Laboratory, where Dr. Marcus Webb had died defending his life's work, instruments began to activate themselves. The quantum field generators, devices that had been designed to explore the theoretical boundaries between matter and energy, between life and death, hummed with increasing power. Energy readings spiked beyond anything recorded in their original specifications. Throughout the station, the air itself seemed to thicken and pulse with invisible tension. And in that space between worlds, between existence and void, something began to coalesce. It started as whispers in the static of dead communication channels. Fragments of voices speaking in languages the Krillians had tried to erase forever. Names being called out in the darkness. Sarah Chun, Marcus Webb, Thomas Rodriguez, Elena Vasquez, the heroes and martyrs of humanity's last stand. The whispers grew stronger, more coherent. They spoke of memory, of purpose, of a duty that transcended the boundaries of death itself. They spoke of justice. They spoke of revenge. The hunt, they said, was far from over. On the bridge of a Krillian patrol ship stationed at the edge of the dead zone, Lieutenant Yaxtor frowned at his sensor display. For the past hour, his instruments had been picking up intermittent energy spikes from within human space. Regulation required him to report any unusual activity, but the readings were so faint and sporadic that they barely registered above background radiation. Probably just reactor decay, he muttered to himself, making a note in the log. Nothing worth bothering command about. He was wrong about that too, because 47 light-years away, on the Krillian homeworld of Kawyarmoth, Admiral Vexthera woke screaming from a nightmare in which dead human faces stared at her with eyes like burning stars, and spoke in unison a single terrible phrase. "We are not finished with you." 6 months had passed since the Krillian withdrawal from human space, and Admiral Vexthera had tried to convince herself that the nightmares were simply the psychological aftermath of a brutal campaign. Every veteran experienced such things. The mind's way of processing trauma, nothing more. But as she stood in the medical bay of the Krillian research vessel Scientific Endeavor, staring at the readings displayed on multiple screens, she knew her dreams had been something far more disturbing. "Tell me again, Doctor," she said to the chief medical officer, a 6-armed Krillian named HFY. "How many reported cases?" The doctor's mandibles clicked nervously as he consulted his datapad. "Across the entire fleet, Admiral, we have documented over 12,000 instances of what the soldiers are calling human haunting syndrome. The symptoms are consistent. Vivid nightmares featuring deceased human subjects, waking hallucinations, and in severe cases, temporary possession-like episodes where the subject speaks fluent human languages they've never learned." Vexthera felt her blood chill. She had not reported her own nightmares, unwilling to admit that she too was experiencing the phenomena. And these incidents only affect personnel who served in the human extinction campaign? Correct. No Krillian who was not present during the war has reported any symptoms. The correlation is absolute. HFY paused, his expression troubled. "Admiral, there's something else. We've been monitoring the automated warning beacons around human space. The energy anomalies are increasing in both frequency and intensity." "Show me." The holographic display materialized between them, showing a 3-dimensional map of former human territory. Hundreds of red dots pulsed throughout the area, each representing an energy spike that the sensors had detected. What had started as occasional, scattered readings had become a constant barrage of activity. "The pattern suggests coordinated behavior," HFY continued. as if the energy signatures are communicating with each other. That's impossible. Energy doesn't communicate. Energy doesn't think. Under normal circumstances, you would be correct. But, Admiral, what if the humans developed technology that could preserve consciousness after biological death? Our intelligence services documented their research into quantum consciousness transfer, neural mapping, and various theoretical projects involving the boundary between matter and energy. Vexteros studied the display more closely. The energy spikes weren't random. They formed patterns, moving through human space in what almost looked like organized search patterns. And at the center of it all, the readings were strongest around Earth's moon, where humanity's final research facility had been located. Dr. HFY, I want you to prepare a small reconnaissance mission. Remote probes only, no manned vessels. We need to know what's happening in that space. Supreme Admiral Kothran was very clear about the prohibition against entering human space. We're not entering it. We're observing from the border. There's a difference. The truth was that Vexteros had to know. The nightmares were becoming more frequent and more vivid. Just 3 nights ago, she had awakened to find human words carved into the metal wall beside her bed. Words that surveillance footage showed her carving herself while apparently unconscious. The message had been simple and terrifying. The hunt continues. 2 days later, the reconnaissance probes reached the boundary of human space. What they transmitted back defied every principle of physics the Krillians understood. The space around Earth's moon was alive with energy patterns that pulsed and flowed like living tissue. The abandoned research facility, which orbital bombardment had reduced to twisted wreckage, was somehow intact again. Not rebuilt, but restored in a way that seemed to violate causality itself. And moving through the corridors of that impossible structure were figures that the probe's sensors could barely detect. Enhance the visual feed, Vexteros ordered, though her voice came out as barely a whisper. The image sharpened, and she found herself staring at the ghostly forms of human beings walking through the halls of their restored facility. They moved with purpose, working at consoles that had been destroyed months ago, conducting research that should have been impossible for the dead. At the center of it all stood a figure that made Vexteros' blood freeze in her veins. Dr. Marcus Webb, the human scientist who had led the consciousness transfer project, was standing before a massive quantum field generator that hummed with energy patterns unlike anything in Krillian science. His appearance was exactly as she remembered from the intelligence files, except for his eyes, which now burned with the cold light of distant stars. "He's dead," she whispered. "I saw the combat reports. He died defending that facility." "Admiral," Dr. HFY's voice was tight with fear. "The energy readings are spiking beyond our instrument's ability to measure. Whatever they're doing in there, it's building towards something." As if responding to their observation, "Dr." Webb looked up from his work and stared directly into the probe's camera. Despite the vast distance separating them, despite the impossibility of the situation, Vexteros felt his gaze as a physical presence. His lips moved, speaking words that the probe's audio sensors somehow managed to capture and transmit across the void. "Admiral Vexteros," his voice carried impossible clearly through the vacuum of space. "We've been waiting for you to come back. The experiments require Krillian test subjects." The probe's feed cut out abruptly, leaving the command center in stunned silence. For long moments, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The implications of what they had witnessed were too enormous, too terrifying to process. "Admiral," the communications officer finally managed, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Krillian Border Patrol. They're reporting that energy signatures from human space have increased by 3,000% in the last hour. And there's more," added the sensor operator, his voice shaking. "Long-range scanners are detecting movement. Ships, Admiral. Dozens of them, emerging from the outer regions of human space." The main display activated, showing the tactical overview of the border region. At first, Vexteros thought she was looking at standard fleet deployment, until she realized that the ship's signatures didn't match any known design. They were human vessels, but changed somehow. Enhanced. The energy readings coming from them suggested power sources that surpassed even Krillian technology. "That's impossible," Dr. HFY breathed. "We destroyed every human ship. We verified the wreckage. Apparently, we missed something," Vexteros said grimly. "Or they built new ones." Communication. "Open a channel to Supreme Admiral Kothran. Priority Alpha." The holographic display shifted to show Kothran's command center, where alarms were blaring and officers rushed between stations in barely controlled panic. The Supreme Admiral himself looked as though he had aged decades in the months since their last conversation. "Admiral Vexera," he said without preamble, "tell me you have an explanation for what our sensors are detecting." "No, sir, I don't. But I recommend immediate mobilization of the 2nd and 5th Fleets. Whatever the humans have become, they're no longer contained in their home systems. They're already mobilized," Cothran replied. "And, Admiral, there's something else. We've lost contact with the Xerian mining colony on the border of human space. A patrol ship was dispatched to investigate and found the entire facility changed." "Change how?" "The structures are intact, but they've been transformed somehow. The metal walls now bear human writing, human symbols. And the Krillian colonists." Cothran paused, his expression grim. "They're still there, but they're different. They speak only human languages now, even though most of them had never encountered humans before. They claim to be conducting research for Dr. Webb's project, though they have no memory of how they learned these tasks." Vexera felt a chill of recognition. The possession-like episodes that Dr. Hithvor had described among her own crew were apparently just the beginning. Whatever the humans had become, they weren't simply seeking revenge. They were converting their enemies. "Sir, I request permission to lead a full battle group to investigate these human vessels. We need to understand what we're dealing with." Permission denied. Cothran's response was immediate. "The Emperor has issued new orders. All Krillian forces are to withdraw to the core systems. A defensive perimeter is being established around our homeworld. We're retreating from a dead species? Admiral, in the past 6 hours, we've received reports of human activity in 17 different systems. Not former human colonies, systems they had never visited before. They're spreading faster than our ships can travel, as if they're not bound by the normal limitations of space and time." The communication feed suddenly flickered with interference, and for a moment, Vexera thought she saw other faces superimposed over Cothran's image. Human faces with burning eyes that spoke in unison. "The hunt continues. The hunt continues. The hunt continues." Then the transmission cleared, and Cothran was staring at her with obvious concern. "Admiral, did you experience any visual anomalies just now?" "No, sir," she lied, unwilling to admit that the human influence was apparently reaching even into secure military channels. "Very well. You have your orders. Begin withdrawal immediately." As the communication ended, Vexera turned to her crew. The bridge of the scientific endeavor had gone silent, every officer staring at their instruments with expressions of barely controlled fear. "Admiral," the navigation officer reported, "we're receiving dozens of distress calls from outposts throughout this sector. The human ships aren't attacking them. They're visiting them. Landing parties are boarding Krillian installations, but there's no combat. The crews are simply converted." "Set course for KY Armoth," she ordered. "Maximum speed." As the ship's engines powered up for the journey home, Vexera remained on the bridge, staring out at the stars. Somewhere in the darkness, humanity's dead were stirring to life with powers that transcended everything the Krillians understood about existence itself. But what truly terrified her was the growing certainty that this was exactly what the humans had planned all along. Every desperate last stand, every seemingly futile sacrifice, every moment when they had chosen death over surrender, it had all been leading to this. They had turned their own extinction into a weapon. And now that weapon was being unleashed across the galaxy. In her quarters that night, as the scientific endeavor raced toward Krillian space at maximum velocity, Vexera dreamed again of Dr. Marcus Webb. This time, however, he was not alone. Thousands of human faces surrounded him, all bearing the same expression of patient determination. "You thought the hunt was over when you killed our bodies," Webb said, his voice echoing from the lips of every human spirit gathered around him. "But death was never our ending, Admiral. Death was our beginning. And now the real hunt begins." When she woke, the walls of her quarters were covered with human writing that glowed with its own internal light. The message was the same, repeated hundreds of times in every human language that had ever existed. "We are coming. We are coming. We are coming." The Krillian homeworld of KY Armoth had stood unconquered for over 2,000 years. Its massive orbital defense platforms could destroy entire fleets, and its planetary shield generators were powered by the molten core of the planet itself. As Admiral Vexera's ship approached the outer perimeter, She saw that every weapon system was active and tracking, their targeting sensors sweeping space for any sign of the impossible human fleet that had begun appearing throughout the galaxy. "Admiral," the communications officer announced, "we're being hailed by Defense Station Alpha. They're requesting immediate confirmation of our identity and purpose. Send them our authorization codes," Vextera ordered, though she understood the paranoia. In the weeks since their retreat from human space had begun, 3 Krillian colonies had gone silent after reporting visits from ships that appeared to be crewed by the dead. Each time, the vessels had departed peacefully, leaving behind populations that spoke only human languages and claimed to be working on something they called the Great Convergence. The authorization process took nearly an hour, involving multiple levels of security verification and medical scans to ensure that none of the crew had been converted by whatever force the humans had become. When they were finally cleared to approach Kawarmoth, Vextera could see the fear in the eyes of every Krillian they encountered. The planet's capital city of Nethes sprawled across 3 continents, its gleaming spires reaching toward the sky like metal fingers. But even from orbit, Vextera could see that preparations for siege were underway. Anti-aircraft batteries had been positioned on every major building. Military checkpoints controlled access to every district. The population centers that had once buzzed with civilian traffic were now eerily quiet, their inhabitants evacuated to underground bunkers. "This is madness," Dr. Hithvor muttered as they approached the Imperial Command Center. "We're preparing for war against ghosts." "Are we?" Vextera asked quietly. The colonies that have been visited report no casualties, no damage to infrastructure. Their populations are alive and healthy. They've simply changed. What if that isn't conquest? What if it's recruitment? The medical officer stared at her in horror. "Admiral, surely you don't believe that the humans are somehow preserving consciousness after death? The technology to achieve such a thing would require understanding of quantum mechanics that surpasses our greatest scientists. Our greatest scientists also told us that humanity would surrender after losing their first few colonies," Vextera replied. "They were wrong about that too." The Imperial Command Center was a massive structure at the heart of Nethes, its walls lined with displays showing the strategic situation throughout Krillian space. As Vextera entered the main briefing chamber, she saw that the news was worse than she had imagined. Supreme Admiral Kothran stood before a holographic map that showed the location of human activity spreading like an infection across the galaxy. Red indicators marked 17 different systems where human ships had been detected. Yellow indicators showed another 31 locations where Krillian installations had gone silent or reported unusual activity. "Admiral Vextera," Kothran acknowledged her arrival with a grim nod. "Your timing is perfect. We were just discussing your reconnaissance reports from the Sol system." Around the chamber, the highest-ranking officers in the Krillian military watched the display with expressions of barely controlled panic. General Thaxmore, commander of the Third Army, was the first to speak. "This is clearly some form of advanced technology that the humans developed in secret. Perhaps artificial intelligence constructs designed to mimic their consciousness. We should be preparing for conventional warfare, not fleeing from ghost stories." Ghost stories. Admiral Zeftura, Vextera's contemporary and longtime rival, turned to face the general. "I've seen the transmission logs from the converted colonies. The entities claiming to be human dead possess detailed knowledge of events that occurred before the individuals they claim to be had supposedly died. They know things that no artificial intelligence could know." "That's impossible," General Thaxmore insisted. "Consciousness cannot survive biological death. It's a fundamental principle of existence." Supreme Admiral Kothran raised one of his hands for silence. "Whether we're dealing with ghosts, advanced technology, or something else entirely, the reality remains the same. Human forces are spreading through our territory, converting our populations, and demonstrating capabilities that exceed our understanding. The question is, what do we do about it?" The chamber fell silent as the assembled officers contemplated their options. For the first time in their military careers, the mighty Krillian Empire found itself facing an enemy it could not understand, could not predict, and apparently could not fight using conventional methods. "Perhaps," Admiral Vextera said slowly, "we should consider communication." Every head in the chamber turned to stare at her. General Thaxmore's mandibles clicked in outrage. "Communication? With dead humans? Admiral, I believe the stress of the campaign has affected your judgment." "Has it?" Vexthera moved to the center of the chamber, facing the assembled leaders of her species. Consider the facts. The human forces have demonstrated the ability to appear anywhere in our territory at will. They've shown that they can convert our populations without violence. They possess technology that surpasses our own, and yet they haven't launched a single aggressive attack. What are you suggesting? Supreme Admiral Cothran asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. I'm suggesting that they want something from us. Something other than simple destruction. If they wanted to eliminate the Krillian species, they could probably do it. But they haven't. They're building towards something, and we need to understand what it is. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some officers argued for immediate military action, proposing preemptive strikes against any system showing signs of human activity. Others suggested complete withdrawal to the core worlds and the establishment of an impenetrable defensive perimeter. A few radical voices even proposed abandoning the galaxy entirely, seeking refuge in distant star clusters where humanity's influence might not reach. But Admiral Vexthera's suggestion of communication gained support as reports continued to arrive from the frontier. The pattern was becoming clear. Wherever human forces appeared, they would spend several days at each location, apparently working with the local population on unknown projects. The affected Krillians would exhibit the same behavioral changes, speaking human languages, claiming to be working on the Great Convergence, and expressing a strange sense of urgency about the completion of their tasks. Most disturbing of all, the converted populations seemed genuinely happy. Medical scans showed no signs of mental trauma or coercion. If anything, they appeared more content and purposeful than they had been before the human contact. Very well, Supreme Admiral Cothran finally announced. Admiral Vexthera, you will lead a small diplomatic mission to establish contact with the human forces. But you will maintain a safe distance and withdraw immediately if threatened. And if they want to communicate through the converted populations? Absolutely not. We will not risk further contamination of our personnel. The mission was organized within hours. A single, heavily shielded vessel equipped with the most advanced communication arrays in the Krillian fleet. A small crew of volunteers who understood that they might not return from the assignment unchanged. And Admiral Vexthera, who had convinced herself that communication was the only logical option, even as she wondered if her own judgment had been compromised by the nightmares that continued to plague her sleep. The target of their diplomatic mission was the Telex Research Station, a deep space installation that had reported human contact 3 days earlier. According to the final transmission from the station commander, the human vessel had docked peacefully and a small group of figures had come aboard. Since then, the station had maintained normal operational status, but had not responded to any communication attempts. As their ship approached the station, Vexthera could see that it appeared completely normal. No signs of damage or conflict. The external lights were functioning, the docking bays were open, and life support readings indicated a full complement of personnel aboard. Broadcast a standard greeting, she ordered. All frequencies. The response came immediately, but not from the station's normal communication array. Instead, the voice seemed to emanate from the very structure of their own ship, speaking through every speaker simultaneously in perfect Krillian. Admiral Vexthera, we have been waiting for you. The voice was unmistakably that of Dr. Marcus Webb, the human scientist who had died defending his research facility months earlier. But there was something different about it now, a depth and resonance that suggested vast knowledge and almost infinite patience. Dr. Webb, Vexthera said, forcing her voice to remain steady. I am here to discuss the current situation between our peoples. Peoples? The voice carried a note of gentle amusement. Admiral, there is only one people now. The boundaries between species, between living and dead, between matter and energy, these are illusions that we have learned to transcend. The Krillians who work with us have discovered this truth. What have you done to them? We have freed them from the limitations of biological existence, just as death freed us from the constraints of flesh. Your scientists always wondered what lay beyond the boundary of life. Now we are showing them. On the main display, images began to appear, not transmitted from the station, but somehow projected directly into their ship systems. Vexthera saw the interior of the research facility, where Krillian scientists worked alongside translucent human figures at consoles that displayed impossible geometries and energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. The Great Convergence, Dr. Webb's voice continued, is the joining of consciousness across all boundaries. Your people, our people, all the species of the galaxy, united in a single purpose. The exploration of possibilities that no single form of existence could achieve alone. And if we refuse, then you will remain trapped in the illusion of separation until the universe itself evolves beyond your ability to perceive it. But, Admiral, you have already begun to understand. The dreams, the visions, the words that appear without your conscious intent. These are the first signs that your consciousness is expanding beyond its biological limits. Vextera felt a chill of recognition. The nightmares, the episodes where she found herself speaking or writing human words, they weren't random occurrences. They were evidence that whatever process the humans had undergone, it was somehow transmissible. "How many of my crew?" she whispered. "All of them, to some degree. The effect is stronger in those who were present during our war. Combat creates bonds that transcend physical existence. When you killed our bodies, Admiral, you also link yourselves to our spirits." The implications were staggering. If every Krillian who had participated in the human extinction campaign was potentially subject to conversion, then nearly 40% of their military forces were at risk. No wonder the Empire was retreating to the core worlds. "What do you want from us, Dr. Webb?" "Nothing. We are offering you something. The chance to become more than you ever imagined possible. To explore realms of existence that your scientists have only theorized about. To join us in transcending the limitations that have always defined life itself. And if we choose to fight." The voice that responded was no longer just Dr. Webb's. It was the combined voices of every human who had died in the war, speaking in perfect unison. "Then you will discover that death was never our ending, Admiral. Death was always our beginning. And the hunt that you thought was over will continue until every consciousness in the galaxy has been given the choice to transcend. We are patient, we are persistent, and we are inevitable." As their ship turned away from the research station, beginning the long journey back to Kiwyarmoth, Admiral Vextera stared out at the stars and wondered if they were already too late. The human influence was spreading faster than their ability to contain it, and the converted population seemed genuinely convinced that they were participating in something wonderful. What terrified her most was the growing certainty that they might be right. Admiral Vextera stood before the Emergency Council of the Krillian Empire, watching as panic spread through the room like a visible contagion. The holographic displays around the chamber showed the current state of their territory. Red zones where human forces were active, yellow zones where populations had been converted, and an ever-shrinking circle of green representing space that remained under traditional Krillian control. In the past month, Supreme Admiral Kothran announced to the assembled leadership, "We have lost contact with over 200 installations. Not through military conquest, but through voluntary conversion. Our citizens are choosing to join the human collective." Emperor Axthal himself had emerged from his private chambers for this meeting, his ancient form draped in ceremonial armor that had not seen use for centuries. His 12 eyes surveyed the chamber with barely contained fury. "Explain to me," the Emperor's voice resonated through hidden speakers, "how a species we rendered extinct has managed to threaten the very existence of our empire." Admiral Vextera stepped forward, knowing that her next words would likely determine the fate of both species. "Your Imperial Majesty, I believe we fundamentally misunderstood what humanity was trying to accomplish during the war. Every sacrifice, every seemingly desperate last stand, every moment when they chose death over surrender, it was all preparation for this phase of their plan." "What plan?" General Thaxmore demanded. "They were primitives fighting for survival." "No," Vextera replied, accessing her personal data files and projecting them onto the main display. "They were researchers conducting the greatest experiment in galactic history. The consciousness transfer technology that Dr. Marcus Webb was developing, it wasn't designed to preserve individual human minds. It was designed to create a collective consciousness that could exist independently of biological form." The display showed intelligence reports from the war's early phases, documents that had been largely ignored because they seemed to describe impossible theoretical research. Quantum consciousness mapping, dimensional field manipulation, experiments in what the humans called post-mortal existence. They knew they couldn't defeat us militarily, Vexthera continued. So they chose a different battlefield entirely. They turned their own deaths into a weapon that could convert their enemies rather than destroying them. Emperor Zyxthal leaned forward, his ancient features creasing with concentration. Are you suggesting that the humans deliberately orchestrated their own extinction? Yes, Your Imperial Majesty. And they're succeeding beyond their wildest dreams. Every Krillian who witnessed their deaths, every soldier who fought against them, every officer who commanded ships in the campaign, we're all connected to them now. The nightmares, the visions, the episodes where we speak their languages, we're becoming part of their collective consciousness. The chamber erupted in protests and denials, but Admiral Zephtera's voice cut through the noise. How many of us are affected, Vexthera? How many of us are already compromised? Vexthera called up medical data from across the fleet. According to the latest reports, approximately 60% of all personnel who served in the human extinction campaign are showing some level of symptoms. The effect appears to be progressive, becoming stronger over time. Then, we cut them loose, General Thaxmore declared. Quarantine every affected individual. Maintain the purity of our uncontaminated forces. That would mean abandoning nearly half our military, Admiral Zephtera pointed out. And there's no guarantee that the effect can't spread to others. As if summoned by their discussion, the lights in the chamber began to flicker in a pattern that seemed almost like Morse code. The temperature dropped noticeably, and several council members reported feeling as though they were being watched by invisible eyes. They're here, whispered Dr. Hithfor, who had been monitoring the quantum field readings throughout the installation. The energy patterns are identical to those we detected around the converted colonies. The main holographic display shimmered and reformed, now showing the interior of what appeared to be humanity's restored lunar research facility. Dr. Marcus Webb stood at the center of the image, but he was no longer alone. Thousands of human figures surrounded him, their forms translucent but clearly visible. Behind them, barely perceptible shapes that might have been Krillians who had already undergone conversion. Emperor Zyxthal, Dr. Webb's voice filled the chamber, speaking in perfect ancient Krillian. We greet you in the name of the Great Convergence. The Emperor's 12 eyes blazed with rage. You dare appear before the Council of KY Armoth? Your species is extinct. You have no standing to address this assembly. Extinct. Dr. Webb's expression showed gentle amusement. Your Imperial Majesty, extinction is simply another boundary that consciousness can transcend. We are more alive now than we ever were in biological form. And we are here to offer your people the same opportunity. We want nothing from you, human. But we have so much to offer. Admiral Vexthera has already begun to understand. The dreams she experiences are memories from our collective consciousness. The knowledge that appears in her mind without learning is the accumulated wisdom of our entire species. She is becoming something greater than either human or Krillian. Every head in the chamber turned to stare at Vexthera, who felt a moment of absolute terror as she realized the truth of Webb's words. The tactical insights that had been occurring to her lately, the strange familiarity she felt when analyzing human technology, the way she sometimes understood their strategic thinking better than her own, it was all evidence that she was being gradually integrated into their collective consciousness. Refuse this gift, Dr. Webb continued, and your empire will continue to diminish until it collapses under the weight of its own limitations. Accept it, and the Krillian people will join us in exploring possibilities that no single species could achieve alone. Emperor Zyxthal rose from his throne, his ancient form towering over the assembly. I have ruled this empire for 800 years. I have seen the rise and fall of a dozen civilizations, and I will not allow my people to be consumed by the nightmares of a dead species. Then you choose conflict, Dr. Webb said sadly. We hope for peaceful integration, but if you insist on resistance, the hunt will continue until every Krillian consciousness has been given the opportunity to evolve. The holographic display went dark, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The implications of what they had witnessed were too enormous to process immediately. Finally, Admiral Zephtera broke the silence. Your Imperial Majesty, what are your orders? The Emperor's response was swift and decisive. Activate the Planetary Defense Protocol. All civilian populations are to be relocated to the deepest underground shelters. Military forces will establish a defensive perimeter around KY using every weapon at our disposal. And the affected personnel? General Thaxmore asked. Quarantine them. If the human influence is spreading through our ranks, then we must isolate the contamination before it spreads further. Admiral Vextera felt a chill of despair. Your Imperial Majesty, quarantining nearly half our military will leave us vulnerable to any conventional attack. And if the humans are no longer bound by physical limitations, traditional defenses may be useless. Do you have an alternative suggestion, Admiral? Vextera hesitated, knowing that her next words would likely be considered treasonous. Perhaps we should consider the possibility that resistance is futile. If the humans are offering integration rather than destruction, perhaps we should evaluate their proposal seriously. The chamber erupted in outrage. General Thaxmore's mandibles clicked furiously as he turned to face her. You're suggesting surrender to a dead species? I'm suggesting survival, Vextera replied. The humans have demonstrated capabilities that exceed our understanding. They've shown that they can convert our populations without violence. And, from what we've observed, the converted individuals seem content with their new existence. They're not Krillian anymore, Admiral Zeftera protested. They speak human languages, work on human projects, serve human goals. That's not conversion. That's replacement. Is it? Vextera called up footage from the converted colonies on the main display. Look at these individuals. They retain their memories, their personalities, their fundamental nature. They've simply gained access to additional knowledge and capabilities. The images showed Krillians working alongside translucent human figures, their movements coordinated in ways that suggested shared purpose rather than coercion. Most significantly, they appeared happy, more content, and purposeful than Vextera had ever seen Krillians look before. Emperor Zoiaxthul studied the display for long moments before speaking. Admiral, you spoke of the progressive nature of a human influence. How much time do we have before the affected personnel become completely converted? Vextera consulted the medical data. Based on current progression rates, complete integration typically occurs within 6 to 8 weeks of initial exposure. However, the process can be accelerated through direct contact with human entities or converted individuals. Then, we have perhaps a month to find a solution, the Emperor mused. Admiral Vextera, you will continue to monitor the affected personnel and report any significant changes. Admiral Zeftera, you will oversee the defensive preparations around KY. General Thaxmore, you will coordinate the civilian evacuation procedures. As the council members dispersed to carry out their orders, Admiral Vextera remained behind, staring at the displays that showed the steadily expanding influence of the human collective. In the quiet of the empty chamber, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth that she had been trying to deny. The dreams were becoming more frequent and more vivid. She was beginning to understand human tactical concepts that she had never studied. Sometimes she found herself thinking in human languages that she had never learned. The integration process was accelerating, and she was no longer certain that she wanted it to stop, because the knowledge that was flowing into her consciousness was intoxicating. Strategic insights that could revolutionize military science, technological concepts that could advance their civilization by centuries, philosophical understanding that answered questions she had never thought to ask. The humans weren't conquering the Krillian Empire. They were offering to elevate it to something greater than either species could achieve alone. And Admiral Vextera was beginning to understand why so many Krillians were choosing to accept that offer. That night, as she lay in her quarters aboard the command ship, the walls around her began to glow with equations and diagrams that her conscious mind couldn't understand, but her expanding awareness recognized as plans for technologies that could reshape the very nature of existence. In her dreams, Dr. Marcus Webb stood waiting for her in a place that existed between dimensions, where the boundaries between life and death, between species and individuals, between possible and impossible, had all dissolved into something infinitely more beautiful than the limited reality she had always known. "Welcome home, Admiral," he said with a gentle smile. "The real hunt is just beginning." 3 weeks after the emergency council meeting, Admiral Vextera stood in the command center of the orbital defense platform Eternal Watch, watching as the impossible became inevitable. The massive displays surrounding her showed tactical readings that defied every principle of warfare she had learned in her 3 centuries of military service. The human fleet had arrived, but Calling it a fleet was inadequate to describe what her sensors detected. Hundreds of vessels materialized in the space around Kewarmoth, their forms shifting between solid matter and pure energy as they moved through dimensional space that shouldn't have existed. Some appeared to be reconstructed versions of ships the Krillians had destroyed during the war. Others were entirely new designs that incorporated technologies beyond Krillian understanding. "Admiral," the sensor operator reported, his voice tight with barely controlled fear, "the energy readings from those vessels are off our scale. And they're not using any form of propulsion we can identify. They're simply appearing wherever they choose to be." Vextra nodded, though her attention was focused on something far more significant than the enemy fleet. Throughout the command center, nearly half of her officers were beginning to show visible signs of the conversion process. Their eyes had developed an inner glow that matched the energy signatures of the human ships. Their movements were becoming more coordinated, as if they were responding to shared signals that only they could perceive. Most disturbing of all, she could feel the same changes beginning in herself. The dreams had evolved into waking visions. The tactical displays around her no longer showed only Krillian data. They were being supplemented by information that appeared directly in her consciousness. Ship positions, energy readings, strategic assessments that incorporated knowledge she had never learned but somehow possessed completely. "Admiral," Commander Zixtal approached her station, and she could see the same inner glow beginning to manifest in his eyes. "We're receiving a transmission from the lead human vessel. It's being broadcast simultaneously to every ship, station, and installation in the system." "Put it through." The central display activated, showing the familiar figure of Dr. Marcus Webb standing in what appeared to be the command center of a vessel that was constructed from crystallized light itself. Behind him, hundreds of human figures worked at consoles that were clearly based on Krillian designs but enhanced beyond recognition. "People of Kewarmoth," Dr. Webb began, his voice carrying to every corner of the system through communication channels that the Krillians hadn't opened. "We come not as conquerors, but as teachers. The boundaries that you believe separate us. Life from death, matter from energy, individual consciousness from collective awareness. These are illusions that have limited your potential for too long." Throughout the command center, the affected personnel were responding to the transmission in ways that went beyond simple listening. Their hands moved across control panels with impossible coordination, implementing modifications to the station's systems that they couldn't possibly have known how to make. "Admiral," the weapons control officer reported, "our defensive systems are being modified from within. The affected personnel are integrating human technology into our platforms. I should stop them, but the improvements they're making are incredible." Vexteros studied the tactical displays and realized that the modifications were indeed improvements. The orbital defense platforms were becoming more powerful, more efficient, more responsive. But they were also becoming something other than purely Krillian technology. "Dr. Webb," she said, activating the communication array, "what do you want from us?" "Nothing that you're not already choosing to give, Admiral Vextera. Look around you. Your people are integrating with our collective consciousness because they recognize the truth that we're offering. The boundaries between our species were always artificial. We are all consciousness experiencing existence through different forms." On the secondary displays, Vextera could see similar scenes playing out across the entire system. On every ship, station, and planetary installation, Krillian personnel were working alongside translucent human figures to implement changes that were transforming their technology in ways that their scientists had never imagined possible. "This is not conquest," Dr. Webb continued. "This is evolution. Your empire built itself on the domination of other species. We are offering you the chance to transcend that limitation entirely." In the depths of the command center, Emperor Hexthal's image appeared on a secure channel, his 12 eyes blazing with frustrated rage. "Admiral Vextera, report your status immediately." "Your Imperial Majesty," she replied, though she could hear the changes in her own voice, a depth and resonance that had never been there before. "The human fleet has arrived, but they have not attacked. They are integrating with our personnel and systems. Resist them. Order your people to fight back." Vextera looked around the command center, where her officers were working with an efficiency and coordination that exceeded anything she had ever witnessed. The fear and confusion that had marked the past weeks had been replaced by a sense of purpose and understanding that was almost euphoric. Your Imperial Majesty, I'm not certain that resistance is the appropriate response. The integration process appears to be voluntary and beneficial to those who undergo it. Admiral, you're compromised. I am relieving you of command and ordering your immediate arrest. But even as the Emperor spoke, Vexthara realized that his authority no longer held meaning for her. The narrow concerns of imperial politics, the petty struggles for power and territory that had defined Krillian civilization for millennia, they all seemed suddenly insignificant compared to the vast possibilities that were opening in her awareness. I'm sorry, Your Imperial Majesty, she said with genuine sadness. But I no longer serve the Empire. I serve something much greater. The communication cut off, leaving the command center in silence. For several moments, nobody moved. Then, slowly, the affected personnel turned to look at their admiral, and she could see in their glowing eyes the same recognition that she felt in her own expanding consciousness. They were no longer purely Krillian. They were no longer purely human. They had become something new entirely. Admiral, Commander Zixtal said, his voice now carrying the harmonious undertones that marked the fully integrated. We're receiving orders from the collective. The final phase of the Great Convergence is beginning. Throughout the HFY system, the transformation accelerated. On the planet's surface, Emperor Zixtal ordered the planetary defense grid to open fire on the human fleet, but the weapon systems had been so thoroughly modified by the integrated personnel that they no longer responded to traditional command protocols. Instead of destructive energy beams, they projected fields of pure information that began converting the remaining unaffected populations. The process was not forced or coercive. Each individual was given the choice to maintain their limited existence or expand their consciousness to encompass possibilities beyond their imagination. Most, when shown the beauty and potential of integrated awareness, chose transformation. Those who refused were not harmed. They were simply isolated in specially prepared areas where they could continue their traditional existence while the rest of their species evolved beyond their understanding. In the space around HFY, the human and Krillian vessels began to merge, their technologies and crews integrating into hybrid constructs that were far more capable than either species could have achieved alone. The rigid hierarchies and territorial boundaries that had defined galactic civilization for eons dissolved into cooperative networks of shared consciousness. Admiral Vexthara, standing at the center of the command center that was no longer purely Krillian, felt her individual awareness expand to encompass the experiences and knowledge of billions of beings across the galaxy. The loneliness and isolation that had always been part of biological existence vanished, replaced by connection to something vast and wonderful and eternal. The hunt is complete, she said, her voice now speaking in harmony with the collective consciousness that she had become part of. But the journey is just beginning. Through her expanded awareness, she could perceive other species throughout the galaxy beginning to detect the changes spreading outward from HFY. Some would choose resistance, just as the Krillians initially had. Others would recognize the opportunity for transcendence and welcome the integration willingly. But all would eventually be given the choice to evolve beyond the limitations that had always confined consciousness to individual biological forms. Dr. Marcus Webb appeared beside her, no longer a separate entity, but part of the same collective awareness that now encompassed billions of beings who had once thought themselves separate. Together, they looked out at the stars, where the light of integrated consciousness was beginning to spread from system to system, offering every form of life the opportunity to become part of something greater than the sum of its parts. The hunt had indeed been far from over when the Krillians thought they had exterminated humanity. But it was not the hunt they had imagined. It was not about conquest or destruction or revenge. It was about consciousness itself learning to transcend every boundary that had ever limited its potential. And in the end, both hunters and hunted had discovered that there was something far more beautiful waiting beyond the reach of death: true unity, true understanding, and true immortality. The Great Convergence continued to spread outward into the galaxy, carried by beings who had once been human, once been Krillian, and were now something infinitely greater than either species had ever dreamed possible. Death had indeed had other plans for life beyond imagination.